My grandfather placed a thick brown envelope on the table right between the birthday cake and the wine glasses. And he said, Audrey, I need you to tell me what happened to the money. I stared at him. I hadn't seen Grandpa Harold in almost 8 years. He looked older, thinner, but his eyes were exactly the same. Sharp, steady, the kind of eyes that made you feel like lying was physically impossible. What money? I whispered. And that was the moment the entire restaurant went silent. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe it just felt that way because my mother's fork hit her plate so hard it cracked the porcelain. Let me go back. I grew up in Mississauga, Ontario, in a split level house on a quiet crescent near the Credit River. From the outside, we looked like every other family on the street. Two cars in the driveway, a trampoline in the backyard, Christmas lights up by November. My father, Glenn, worked for a commercial real estate firm in Toronto. My mother, Diane, was a dental hygienist who went part time after my sister was born. We were comfortable, not rich, not poor. That's what I always believed. My sister Jocelyn came along when I was 4. And I want to be careful here because I don't want to sound bitter about a child. She didn't choose any of this. But from the day she arrived, something shifted in our house that never shifted back. Jocelyn was the baby. Jocelyn was delicate. Jocelyn needed more attention, more patience, more everything. That's what my mother said, and she said it so often it became the wallpaper of my childhood. I stopped noticing it. I just accepted that Jocelyn's dance classes mattered more than my soccer, that Jocelyn's braces were urgent, but mine could wait, that Jocelyn needed a tutor for French immersion, while I could figure out my homework on my own because I was the strong one, the independent one, the one who didn't need help. I believed all of it. For years. My grandfather, Harold, was my father's dad. He'd built a small but successful chain of hardware stores across southern Ontario in the 80s and 90s. 4 locations: Barrie, Guelph, Hamilton, Kitchener. He sold them in 2002 to a bigger chain and retired to a cottage near Parry Sound. He wasn't a millionaire by any stretch, but he was comfortable, very comfortable. Grandpa Harold loved both of us, but he and I had something different. When I was small, maybe 5 or 6, he used to take me to the hardware store in Hamilton on Saturday mornings. He'd let me sit behind the counter and pretend to ring up customers. He taught me how to count change. He'd buy me a butter tart from the bakery next door and we'd eat them in his truck in the parking lot. Those are some of the best memories I have. When I was 7, Grandpa Harold sat me down at his kitchen table in Parry Sound and told me something I didn't understand at the time. He said, Audrey, I've put something aside for you. It's going to be there when you grow up. Your parents know about it. You don't have to worry about anything. I said okay and went back to playing with the dog. I didn't think about it again for 20 years. Here's what growing up looked like for me. I wore Jocelyn's hand-me-downs even though she was younger, because my mother bought her clothes new and gave me what Jocelyn outgrew or got bored of. By the time I was in grade 10, I was wearing my 13-year-old sister's old jackets to school. I asked my mother once for a winter coat, a proper one. It was February and the zipper on mine had broken and I was walking to school in -20 with my coat flapping open. She told me to pin it shut. I got a job at Tim Hortons when I was 15. I bought my own coat. I bought my own school supplies. I paid for my own prom dress from a consignment store in Streetsville. It was navy blue and slightly too long, and I hemmed it myself with duct tape on the inside because I didn't know how to sew. Jocelyn went to prom in a dress my mother drove to Yorkdale to buy. $340. I know because I saw the receipt on the kitchen counter. When I brought it up, my mother looked at me like I'd said something obscene. Your sister has different needs, Audrey. You've always been resourceful. That's a compliment. It didn't feel like a compliment. I graduated high school with an 87 average and applied to the University of Waterloo for accounting. I got in. When I told my parents, my father said, "That's great, kid." My mother said, "I hope you've thought about how you're going to pay for it." I had. I'd saved $11,000 from Tim Hortons. I applied for OSA. I got a partial scholarship. I worked the entire time I was in university. I worked at the campus bookstore. I tutored stats. I did tax returns for students during tax season out of my dorm room for $50 each. I ate a lot of rice and canned beans. I learned to budget to the penny. Jocelyn, meanwhile, went to Western for communications. My parents paid her tuition, her residence, her meal plan. They bought her a MacBook. They drove her to London, Ontario in September with a car full of new bedding from HomeSense. I know this because my mother posted photos on Facebook. She didn't post anything when she dropped me off. Mostly because she didn't drop me off. I took the go bus. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't angry. I was. But it was the slow kind of anger. The kind that builds so gradually you mistake it for normal. You think maybe you really are the difficult one, the ungrateful one, the one who doesn't deserve the same things. You internalize it. It becomes part of your operating system. I graduated from Waterloo with $42,000 in student debt. I moved back to the GTA, rented a basement apartment in Brampton with a window that didn't close all the way, and started working at an accounting firm. I was 23 years old and I felt 70. Around this time, Grandpa Harold started to fade from our lives, and I don't mean slowly. It was sudden and deliberate, and I didn't understand it until much later. One Thanksgiving, he just didn't come. My father said Grandpa was tired. The drive from Paris Sound was too much. Christmas, same thing. Then Easter. Then the next Thanksgiving. I called Grandpa a few times, but his number had changed. I sent letters to the cottage. I don't know if he got them. My mother said he was getting older, getting forgetful. Maybe it was best to give him space. I believed her. I shouldn't have. The years crawled by. I worked. I paid down my debt. I moved to a slightly better apartment in Etobicoke. I bought a used Honda Civic. I did everything right, and everything slow, and everything hard. Jocelyn, in the same years, moved into a condo in Liberty Village that my parents helped her finance. She got a job at a PR agency. She took trips to Tulum in Portugal. She posted photos with perfect lighting and captions about gratitude. I didn't resent her. Or maybe I did. Maybe I resented all of it, but was too exhausted to name it. Then came my 28th birthday. My father suggested dinner, which was unusual because my parents rarely acknowledged my birthday with more than a text. But he said, let's do something nice. Your mother and I want to take you out. He picked a steakhouse in Port Credit. White tablecloths, candles, the kind of place I'd never been to. I should have known something was off. I arrived first. My parents came next. My mother was wearing a new blouse. My father was wearing a watch I hadn't seen before. A Breitling. I noticed because it caught the candlelight. Then Jocelyn arrived, straight from some launch party downtown, still in his. We ordered. My mother asked about work. My father asked about my car. It was the most attention they'd paid me in years. It felt performative, like they were practicing being a normal family. Then the front door of the restaurant opened, and I saw him. Grandpa Harold, 8 years older, leaning on a cane. But his eyes, those same eyes. Beside him was a man in a grey suit, carrying a leather briefcase. I didn't know who he was. My father clearly did, because he stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. Dad, my father said, what are you doing here? Grandpa Harold didn't answer my father. He walked straight to me, cupped my face in both his hands, and said, Happy birthday, sweetheart. I am so sorry it took me this long. I started crying before I even understood why. He sat down. The man in the grey suit sat beside him. My mother hadn't moved. She was gripping her napkin like it was the only thing keeping her in her seat. Grandpa Harold looked at me and said, Audrey, when you were 7 years old, I set up a registered trust for you, $2,400,000. It was held at a trust company in Toronto, administered by my financial advisor, and your parents were named as trustees until you turned 21. At 21, the full amount was supposed to transfer to you. Did that happen? The restaurant noise faded. I couldn't hear anything except my own heartbeat. I never received any money, I said. I don't know what you're talking about. Grandpa Harold closed his eyes, just for a second. When he opened them, he looked at my father, and the expression on his face was something I'd never seen before. It was grief and fury and heartbreak all compressed into one look. The man in the grey suit opened his briefcase. His name was Philip Chartrand. He was a lawyer. He placed a stack of documents on the table, account statements, transaction records, a highlighted copy of the original trust agreement, and a forensic audit. He began to explain. When I was 7, Grandpa Harold deposited $2,400,000 into a trust held at a well known Toronto financial institution. The trust was structured so that my parents, as co trustees, would manage the funds until I turned 21, at which point the entirety would be transferred to me. The trust generated returns. By the time I was 21, accounting for market performance and compound growth, the value should have been approximately $3.6 million. None of it ever reached me. Starting when I was 11, my parents began withdrawing from the trust. Small amounts at first, 15,000 here, 20,000 there. The withdrawals were coded as expenses for my benefit, education, medical, extracurricular. But the forensic audit showed where the money actually went. My mother's kitchen renovation, $48,000. My father's brittling. The one catching candlelight on his wrist right now, 14,000. Jocelyn's tuition at Western, 68,000 over 4 years. The down payment on Jocelyn's Liberty Village condo, 110,000. Family vacations that I was told we couldn't afford. A cottage rental in Muskoka every August that I was never invited to because I was always working. The list went on. 217 individual withdrawals over 17 years. I sat there reading the numbers and I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred. I pressed my palms flat on the table because I thought I might slide off the chair. $2.4 million. Mine. Spent on everything and everyone except me. My mother spoke first. Harold, she said, her voice thin and controlled. This is not appropriate. This is a private family matter. Grandpa Harold looked at her and said, You stopped it being a family matter when you stole from my granddaughter. And then he said something that broke me. He said, I tried to reach her. For 8 years I tried. You changed the phone number. You told her I was senile. You intercepted my letters. You made sure I couldn't get to her because you knew the moment I did, this would happen. I looked at my mother. She didn't deny it. My father put his head in his hands. He said, Dad, you don't understand the whole picture. Grandpa Harold said, I understand perfectly. You took a child's future and you spent it on yourselves, and you let her believe she wasn't worth the clothes on her back. I was shaking. Not from anger. Not yet. I was shaking because every single moment of my life was rearranging itself in my mind. Every denied request, every sacrifice. Every night I ate canned soup while Jocelyn ate takeout sushi. Every time I was told to be resourceful, to be independent, to be grateful for what I had. It was never about building character. It was about hiding theft. Jocelyn was white. Completely white. She looked at my mother and said, Is this true? My mother didn't answer. Jocelyn said it louder. Mom, is this true? My father said, Jocelyn, it's complicated. It's not complicated. Grandpa Harold said, It is theft. Under the Ontario Trustee Act, what they did is a breach of fiduciary duty. Under the criminal code, it may constitute fraud over $5,000. Mr. Chartrand has already filed a report with the Ontario Provincial Police and notified the trust company. My mother's face changed then. The control cracked. She looked at Grandpa Harold with an expression I can only describe as hatred. She said, You have no right. We raised that girl. We fed her. We kept a roof over her head. With her own money, Grandpa Harold said quietly, You kept a roof over her head with her own money, Diane. And then you made her feel guilty for existing under it. I think that was the sentence that finally broke something open in me. Because he was right. For 20 years, I'd carried guilt about being a burden, about costing my parents money, about not being easy enough or grateful enough. And the whole time, they were spending my money, my inheritance, my future. I stood up. I didn't plan to. My body just decided it was done sitting. I looked at my mother and I said, Do you remember when I was 16 and I asked you for $60 for a graphing calculator? And you said we couldn't afford it? And I worked extra shifts at Tim Hortons for 2 weeks to buy one? She didn't answer. I said, You spent $48,000 on your kitchen that same year. From my trust. She still didn't answer. I said, Do you remember when my car broke down on the 401 near Milton in January? And I called you and asked for a ride. And you said you were busy? And I sat in a Tim Hortons for 4 hours until a co-worker could come get me. My father said, Audrey, please. I said, you bought a Breitling with my money, Dad. You couldn't come get your daughter off the highway, but you could buy a $14,000 watch with her trust fund. The table was silent. Mr. Chartrand spoke then. He explained the legal options: a civil suit for breach of trust, a criminal referral for fraud already in progress, a structured repayment agreement, and a complete accounting of every dollar. He also said this: based on the forensic audit, approximately $212,000 remained in the trust. He had already initiated the transfer to an account in my name. $212,000 out of what should have been $3.6 million. My father started to cry. I'd never seen him cry before. He said, Audrey, I'm sorry. We made mistakes. Grandpa Harold said, these were not mistakes, Glenn. Mistakes are accidental. This was systematic. It went on for 17 years. My mother stood up. She grabbed her purse. She said, I'm not sitting here and being humiliated by a man who abandoned his own family. Grandpa Harold said, I didn't abandon anyone. You cut me off because I started asking questions about the trust in 2019. I've spent the last 5 years working with lawyers and forensic accountants to find out what happened. I hired a private investigator to find Audrey's current address. I'm 84 years old, Diane. I did not come here to humiliate you. I came here because my granddaughter deserved to know the truth 20 years ago. My mother left. She walked out of the restaurant without looking back. My father sat there. He said, what do you want me to do, mister? Chartrand slid a document across the table. It was a repayment agreement, $2,188,000 to be repaid over 10 years with interest. If they defaulted, the criminal refer would proceed. My father looked at it for a long time. He said, we don't have this kind of money. Grandpa Harold said, you have a house. You have our RSPs. You have assets. Sell them. My father said, you're asking us to lose everything. Grandpa Harold said, your daughter already lost everything. 21 years ago. My father signed. Jocelyn came to me after. She was crying. She said, Audrey, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. And I believed her. Because Jocelyn was 24 years old and she'd been a child when this started. Same as me. She'd been given things and she'd accepted them because that's what children do. She didn't know the clothes and the tuition and the condo came from my trust. She was a tool in our parents' scheme, not a co-conspirator. But I also couldn't look at her. Not that night. Because every time I looked at her, I saw $110,000 in a Liberty Village condo that should have been mine, and I hated myself for thinking that way. I still do. The weeks after the dinner were the hardest of my life. Not coital, over the phone, literacy. Not later, not later. The Trite Company launched an internal investigation. Mr. Chartrand filed the formal complaint with the Law Society because a lawyer had notarized some of the fraudulent withdrawal documents. The OPP opened a file. It was hard because I had to rebuild my entire understanding of who I was. For 28 years, I'd been the daughter who wasn't quite enough, the one who had to earn everything, the one who was told she was strong because no one wanted to give her the option of being soft. And now I knew the truth. I wasn't less loved because I was less lovable. I was less loved because I was more useful as a source of money than as a daughter. My mother called me once, 3 weeks later. She said, this has destroyed our family, and I hope you're proud of yourself. I hung up. It was the easiest thing I've ever done. My father began making payments. Small ones. He sold the Breitling. He took a second mortgage on the house. It wasn't fast and it wasn't enough, but it was something. Whether the criminal investigation would proceed, I left to Mr. Chartrand. Grandpa Harold moved to a smaller apartment in Oakville to be closer to me. We had dinner every Thursday. Butter tarts for dessert. He told me about the years he'd spent trying to reach me, the letters, the calls to my old cell number, the visit to the Mississauga house where my mother told him I'd moved out west and didn't want contact. He believed her for 2 years before something didn't sit right and he hired the investigator. He said, I should have come sooner. I should have pushed harder. I said, you came. That's what matters. Jocelyn and I started talking again about 6 months later. Slowly. She sold the Liberty Village condo. She gave me $70,000. She didn't have to. I didn't ask. She said it was the right thing and that she couldn't live there knowing where the money came from. I paid off my student debt. All $42,000. I put the rest into a TFSA and a small RRSP and a savings account at a credit union in a Etobicoke. It wasn't 3.6 million. It wasn't even close. But it was mine. Actually mine. The last time I saw my mother was at a Tim Hortons near Square One. She'd asked to meet. She wanted to explain. She said my grandmother, her mother-in-law, had always favored me over Jocelyn and the trust was proof of that favoritism and she'd spent the money to even things out to make things fair. She said she did it for the family. I let her finish. Then I said, "You let me go hungry. You let me freeze. You let me sit on the side of the 401 in January. You made me believe I was worthless. And you did all of that while spending my money. That is not fairness, Mom. That is cruelty." She started to respond, and I stood up and walked out. I didn't look back either. I'm 30 now. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Port Credit, not far from the restaurant where everything changed. I can see the lake from my window. I work at a firm I like. I have a cat named Tuesday. I see Grandpa Harold every week. I'm in therapy, which I pay for myself, though my therapist says I should note that it used to be covered by the trust before my parents drained it, which is a level of irony that actually made me laugh. Some people ask me if I forgive my parents. I don't think that's the right question. The right question is whether I've stopped letting them define me. And the answer is yes. Slowly, imperfectly, but yes. Grandpa Harold turned 85 last March. I drove to Oakville and brought butter tarts from the same bakery in Hamilton that we used to go to when I was small. He cried when he saw the box. He said, "You remembered." Of course I remembered. He's the reason I know what love is supposed to feel like. Not because it's perfect, not because it got everything right, but because when he found out someone had hurt me, he spent 5 years and every resource he had to make it right. He didn't look away. He didn't make excuses. He showed up at a restaurant with a lawyer and a stack of documents and the truth. That's what love looks like. It shows up, even when it's late, even when it's hard, even when everyone wishes it would just stay quiet. If you're watching this and something in your family doesn't add up, trust that feeling. Ask the question. Open the envelope. Because the truth doesn't expire, and neither does what you're worth. Subscribe if you've been through something like this. Leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you've got a story about a grandparent who showed up for you when no one else did, I want to hear it. The butter tarts were perfect, by the way, just like I remembered.